Hey guys, welcome back to another video. It's Miles here, and today we're going to be going over the Demon Hunter's talent tree, specifically the Vengeance Demon Hunter talent tree, as mentioned in yesterday's video. And it looks like it's probably going to be the last video that I make talking about Dragonflight talents, at least for now, unless there's some serious changes that happen down the line. But this is probably the last time I'm going to theorize, I guess you could say, some of the potential talent trees that we could see, or builds that we could see certain classes doing. As mentioned as well, both in yesterday's stream and my yesterday's video, I spoke a little bit about potentially doing the other 3 tanking specs. However, I simply do not have the skill, really, to be able to say what's going to be good on those specs. I'm not good at Guardian Druid, not good at Prot Warrior, not good at Blood DK. Well, I'm okay at Blood DK, however, I know Blood DK is probably the hardest min-maxy spec, and it's probably the hardest spec to really fully understand, and I know there is a million better people than me, so I'm just not qualified to do that. But I might bring on some people that I know are really good at those specs to talk about it and to discuss what they think could be some of the best talents as well. But who knows, we'll see what happens in the future. But let's not waste any more time, let's jump straight into it. So I looked at this yesterday a lot during my stream. I went really and started theorizing some builds for a couple hours. Spoke to my stream chat a little bit about it, and I've got a couple builds which I think could be really decent. And this is probably the tanking spec, at least throughout all the builds that I've seen from all the tanking specs, especially the 2 that I've gone over already. This is probably the one that has the biggest change going from single target to AoE, most likely your raid progression as well to M+. The difference in builds is huge, honestly. It's a completely different world of builds and of things that you want to go. So you'll notice that the playstyles are going to be completely different, going from single target to M+. Mostly just because, I don't know if many of you have played Vengeance Demon Hunter during Shadowlands, but the builds mainly for sort of raid progression single target was the Fiery Brand build. This build was purely based around keeping up Fiery Brand as much as you feasibly could, which is basically a huge amount of DR, while also trying to dish out a decent amount of single target damage, whereas the AoE builds were more based around sort of, well, a lot of people went the Spirit Bomb build, and all that kind of stuff, and especially during Sanctum of Domination, some people would even go the Kyrian Lego, which was, you know, giving you more soul shards, which was giving that versatility growth build, which is completely different build. And then we're kind of seeing a similar thing happening with these talent trees. So let's just go into the baseline talent tree. So if this is for single target, raid progression, yeah, the start of this tree doesn't have the most fantastic choices, at least in my opinion. A lot of these don't give you any serious benefit. You know, you compare this to something more similar to a, you know, paladin or a monk, and you see a lot more abilities that are actually quite useful in these areas. However, as a demon hunter, these aren't really the case. So we go for first Hot Feet, which is giving you your Infernal Strike, which is your main form of movement. We're giving that an additional charge, which is super important, super good. And also going for Vengeful Retreat, which is more movement, which kind of solidifies Vengeance Demon Hunter as the extremely movement-heavy tank. I think it's really good that you're going to get Vengeful Retreat. It's not too super important that you get it, obviously, but it is a good ability, and it is useful, especially if you're in a high movement fight. We're also going to go for the 2 upgrades on the Maximum Fury, so you get to 120 Maximum Fury, which is really useful, actually. That just basically means that there's no capping if you need to get out the extra fracture or something along those lines. So, like I said, there's some decent ones, but as we're going to get further down, we're going to notice that these are all kind of meh. Shattering Souls increased by 10%, yep, just 10% increased. So I'd say about 50% average of your healing is done by Shattered Souls. So this is realistically giving you about a 5% HPS increase, which is useful. It's something, you know, it's worth doing. Then we'll go for the 5% healing for all fire damage that you deal. Again, really good. Almost all your damage is fire damage, so we're getting 5% healing from fire damage. Is also nice. It's a nice one to have here. The increased range on your Disrupt. Obviously, your Disrupt is baseline. You always have it. and getting an increased range by 10 yards is useful, especially in a raiding environment. It means that if there's something that you need to interrupt as a tank, you never will ever have to really move the boss, unless it's like a super far ranged one, but then the ranged players will having to do that interrupt anyway, so that's just a nice quality of life one, but we're mostly doing it so we can unlock Fel Blade. Now, Fel Blade, in my opinion, being on Vengeance is going to be really interesting. It generates a lot of Fury and it does a decent amount of damage on a 15-second cooldown, but mostly it is the Fury generation. Generating 40 Fury is nice. It will be useful, and it does give you this little dash as well for 15-yard dash. If you do need that little bit of movement extra on top of all these other bits of movement that you have, it's going to be useful for that also. Then moving down, it's a 60-second reduced cooldown of Meta, extremely important. This is probably the most vital talent that we've had so far, and it is an entire new row that increases, like that opens up. So Blizzard very much intended for you to take this. This is like, is it centerpiece? You unlock it just by unlocking this row. You don't have to do anything to get into it. So they want you to take this, which is definitely going to push more towards the sort of balancing part. Then from here, we're going to take 2 points into both Soul Rending and Infernal Armor. Now, Infernal Armor being in the base tree was a bit interesting for me because that's not really going to help the Havocs at all, and it's in a bit of a weird spot, being quite central and all. Really good though. 20% armor increase isn't fantastic, you know. This is maybe 3.5% DR because it is a leather wearing class, so armor isn't a big deal for you. But obviously, attackers taking a little bit of damage is useful. Like, it does something at least. It mostly is, you know, 3.5% DR and a tiny bit of damage. It's good. Even though in raid and single target it's not going to be the most important, it's still decent. It's still worth taking to an extent. Then we're going to go from here, we're going to go into Demonic, which is a talent that you've basically always taken on Vengeance Demon Hunter, which is I-Beam or Fel Devastation. It is causes you to enter demon form for 6 seconds after it finishes dealing damage. So you have basically 7 seconds really, because you have about a full second of doing Fel Devastation, where you're still in that meta, and it doesn't start the timer until after you're finished. So you get about 6-7 seconds of Fel Devastation after using this, which is super good. Not Fel Devastation, sorry, of Metamorphosis after casting Fel Devastation, which is insane. This is what makes Fel Devastation such an important ability, and is what makes Demon Hunters able to survive a lot of things, because Meta is probably the most huge defensive. Being in Metamorphosis is a huge defensive. You're practically unkillable sometimes when in Metamorphosis. So being able to get this relatively often with Demonic is the most important part about taking that. And basically makes Fel Devastation, which is already, you know, 1 minute cooldown, but later on we're going to be able to reduce that by a ton, is going to make, you know, Fel Devastation really one of the best defenses you've got. So yeah. Then we're also going to put a point into Sigil Silence and Chaos Nova. Both not really useful in raids, honestly. These are both very average. There's some uses for them. A really big one for Soul Render was Sigil Silence was incredibly good for Soul Render, because what you're able to do is you're able to put down the Sigil Silence on top of the adds that were next to the big add that spawns on Mythic difficulty, just so they're silenced past when the big ad would come out. So then when you weren't able to interrupt them, they were still silenced for, you know, quite a long time afterwards. So, you know, being able to do that, and then that would delay it long enough that you were actually able to kill a big guy and then interrupt them afterwards. Very niche use, however, it's still a use. It's still worth putting out there. Chaos Nova is a, you know, short AoE interrupt. Again, very niche, but I suppose if you need it for something like the Mythic Anduin adds, where you need to just constantly stun them, Chaos Nova is useful for those scenarios as well. Granted, not as useful. Then we're going to actually we still have a few points to go, so we're actually going to work our way back up the tree and put into Pursuit. This isn't really that good, honestly. This really isn't like fantastic, because you don't build mastery. However, if you do have some mastery, you can use movement speed, it's whatever. We're mainly doing it so we can get further down to the other stuff. We're going to put another point into Fellfire Haste, which gives you 10% movement speed after using your Infernal Strike, which is useful, because most of the time after using Infernal Strike, you know, obviously you've done it to get a bit of movement, and if you're moving far, getting the extra 10% movement speed for 8 seconds is useful to some extent as well. Next on, but then this is what we're really going down there for, is the magic damage reduction. This is a really important one in my opinion. because magic damage, not many tanks deal with magic damage very well. You know, Monk really doesn't deal with magic damage all too well. You know, Blood Decay does to an extent. Paladin, especially with the current talents, Paladin's never going to be able to survive magic damage. You know, everything's armor based. Paladin will get absolutely demolished by magical damage because you know you which one armor and block. And then this way, Demon Hunter actually is looking like a spec that can deal with magic damage quite well. So if there is, for some reason, an incredibly high magic damage based fight, we might actually see Demon Hunter being on it because they are going to be looking really good for those. But now we've opened up the last part of the tree. So first of all, Darkness. Obviously, in a raid progression point of view, Darkness is the most important ability a Demon Hunter can have. This is incredibly powerful, and you're also going to go for the 2-minute reduction on Darkness. Again, really good. Basically, this is going to make Darkness a 3-minute cooldown, meaning that you're getting easily 2 uses of it in a fight. In some progression fights, you might even be able to get 3 uses of Darkness. And the fact that Vengeance Demon Hunter now has Darkness really, really brings more of a reason as why you want to bring a Vengeance Demon Hunter. You know, before it was only Havoc that had Darkness, but now Vengeance has it too. This is such a huge buff for Vengeance in a raid point of view that it genuinely might take them into some fights. I think Darkness and also being on a 3-minute cooldown and stuff like that is just so big. So big. Next one we're going to take is though is the Hunt. This is the Night Fae ability that we saw from Shadowlands. It does a lot of damage, you can see. 455% of attack power, and then not only that, but it's then going to do a 227% dot, which then heals you for 50% of the damage that the dot does, which is huge. And you also heal for a ton of the damage that you deal for 30 seconds afterwards that you do to the target. Overall, this is a huge ability for single target. Single target, this is unbelievable. AoE, it's still okay. AoE is still a good ability in AoE, but for single target, this thing is monstrous. This thing is so powerful. And for a very long time, actually, Demon Hunters were considering going Night Fae, and a lot of Vengeance Demon Hunters did go Night Fae, actually, especially during Sanctum of Domination. However, people started to go back because the Kieran ability was just so powerful. Obviously, Elysian Decree being really, really good. And then the last node, which is the choice node at the end, isn't really that important, but you can increase the damage of a time effect by 30% from Unnatural Malice, or reduce the cooldown while an enemy is killed under the effect of the dot. Obviously, it's a raid single target, you know, just go for the dot damage. Like, 30% of damage, though, is a lot. Honestly, it is quite a big increase. It's going to give you a really decent amount. And therefore, it's worth taking. Yeah, so the next one is the Internal Struggle, which increases your mastery. We're not exactly sure what the numbers are going to be. So it's 2 times your mastery percentage. So not exactly sure what. I'm not exactly sure exactly what it's going to be, but obviously it's not that great. It's mastery, you don't really need it, but it's a bit of an attack power increase, which is one thing. And then second of all, it's obviously going to affect your movement speed as well, which is useful in some sense. So it has some things, but we're mainly doing it to reduce the cooldown of Infernal Strike by 20%. Sorry. Oh god, I also swallowed the wrong way. But yeah, 20% reduced cooldown on Infernal Strike, which is really useful. Really, really useful. Because, as mentioned earlier, you're going for those incredibly high movement build. 20% reduction on Infernal Strike means that you can just keep going, and just keep going, and keep doing all the mechanics. A really good example of what a lot of guilds, and what my guild specifically did on Mythic Painsmith, which is one of the hardest boss fights. I'd probably say the second hardest boss fight of the whole of Sanctum of Domination. Most guilds around the 100 wipes-ish, or more in some cases. And tanks had to do the X combos, obviously with each other. And the problem was that you had to have either a Paladin or a Demon Hunter really to get around it, or at least have Paladins like off-speccing onto like healing or ret to be able to bop the other tank as they go through. But Demon Hunters are the best for it, because Demon Hunters could just jump around, it was no problem. Demon Hunters literally just went straight through, it was fine. However, the big thing that a lot of people had was, let's say if you had a DK, which has very little movement, it was also challenging for the DK just to get to the other side of the room for the second axes. So you'd have the Vengeance Demon Hunter, at least in my guild, and like I said, a lot of other guilds did, Vengeance Demon Hunter would just take every single axe, literally every single one of them. So you would taunt right before the next axe happens and then run to the other side of the room. And if we have to do something like that again as Vengeance Demon Hunter, 20% reduction is going to be huge. And even outside of that, just being able to Infernal Strike, because bear in mind, Infernal Strike is off the GCD. It is not a GCD ability, so if you don't need any movement for the fight, you can just use it while doing your normal rotation, and it does extra damage. You know, right now it does about 1k damage, which isn't huge, but it's about an extra 300 DPS in a fight, which is a lot. You know, that's not bad. So reducing the cooldown just gives you more damage, even if you don't need the movement. So there's a lot of practical uses to taking this, and that's a big reason as to why I've, you know, kind of gone on about this talent, even though we're mainly doing it for Collective Anguish, which is going to summon the Allied Havoc Demon Hunter doing I-Beam, which just basically gives you more damage on each Fel Devastation, but this is still a very good talent in my opinion. Next up, we only have a couple points left, which we're going to put into increasing parry chance by 3%, and enemies deal 8% reduced magic damage to you for 8 seconds after being affected by one of your sigils, meaning that if the boss is a magic damage heavy boss, you can just quickly throw down a Sigil Flame, bang, boss does 8% reduced damage to you for 8 seconds. Useful. Honestly, it's good. Like, niche to an extent, but good. Niche, but good. But we'll take that. So that's how I think this main tree is going to go. It's somewhat similar, but there is some changes for the AoE build, which obviously we'll get into in a second. Vengeance tree now. I'll quickly talk about Frailty actually, but I'll go over Fel Dev. So Fel Dev, standard ability, Firebrand standard, Frailty. Enemies struck by Sigil of Flame are affected by Frailty for 5 seconds. You heal for 8% of the damage. You deal targets with Frailty. Now this is something that Spirit Bomb has always had, and Spirit Bomb's always had this version of Frailty, making you heal for the damage that you deal to enemies after dealing with Spirit Bomb, which is a big reason as to why it was so strong, because you got so much healing from it, because you're doing such big AoE damage, that this now working off Sigil of Flame as well is useful. And in AoE you'll find that the Frailty build is probably the build that I'm going to go for as well, but let's just do the rest of the single target build, which is going to be the Fiery Brand build, the dreaded Fiery Brand build that no one really wanted to see come back in Dragonflight. At least I didn't. I don't think Fiery Brand is a fun ability to use at all. I think Fiery Brand, to me, is one of the most boring abilities. You just kind of pop it, and that's it. Like there's no playing around it. Like there's no interactive mechanics with it. You literally just press it on the enemy, and that enemy now does reduced damage to you, and you heal, and you deal some damage to them. Oh god. But besides the point, let's go further down this tree. So we're going to go for the Deflecting Spikes, which Demon Spikes also increases your parry chance by 15% for 6 seconds. This is good, especially if you're looking at a fight which is pretty heavy auto attack fights. Again, I'm going to use Jailer as an example. I feel like I always do this, but because Jailer is such a good example of a fight that just trucks you with melee hits. There's been a bunch of others. Guardian was also a fight that trucked you with melee hits. Skolex was a fight that trucks you with melee hits. There's still a lot of fights that do, but Jailer is the most well-known one for trucking melee hits. Super good. You pop it, 15% parry chance. You just parry the hits, you're sorted. So that's actually really good in some scenarios. Again, some scenarios it is completely useless though, but it's still worth taking because it is only one node early on. Abyssal Haste reduces the cooldown of Infernal Strike again, but this time by 8 seconds. So now Infernal Strike has gone from being, I think it's 20 seconds baseline. I'm pretty sure now you reduce it down to something like 10-second recharge or something like that, like an 8-second recharge. So yeah, you're the absolute movement god now on Vengeance Demon Hunter, which is really cool. I'm really excited to see Vengeance Demon Hunter and how movable it's going to be, and also how much kiting you're going to be able to do. And plus, it's going to be quite cool. The next choices we're going to make is Fel Flame Fortification, which is you take 6% reduced magic damage while Immolation Aura is active. Again, something that most tanks are struggling with is this magic damage reduction. And here we've got the 4% here, and this is basically going to be 100% like of the time, almost 100% of the time. Another 6% reduced there to make it 10% reduced, and then you can make it a further 8% by affecting them with one of your sigils. So you've got a lot of things going for you here. I'm going to mute my mic to cough in the future, then I'm not going to cough on mic anymore. I'm done with that. We still have a couple more choices that we need to make up here, so we will go into the Perfectly Balanced Glaive, which is whatever. Don't care about this. This is completely useless, but we're only choosing this to get down to Fracture. Fracture, incredibly useful. Best for single target. My biggest problem with Fracture is that it's on the left side. Fracture should not be on the left at all. This is the wrong place for Fracture. I really hope they move it over to the right, but for now it seems to just be on the left. Whatever. Either way, we're getting Fracture. Super useful. It's a talent that you've basically always used. Very nice. And we're also going to go for this talent, which is Calcified Spikes, if that's how you say it. You take 10% reduced damage after Demon Spikes ends, falling by 1% every second. So basically for 10 seconds you get a diminishing 10% DR after using Demon Spikes, which is really good. You know, you use Demon Spikes, you get this little bit of DR from your armor that you gain, and then it slowly begins to fall off after it ends. You're still getting this big DR. In fact, actually, you probably get more DR from Demon Spikes the moment Demon Spikes ends than when Demon Spikes is going. So like there's a lot of benefits to taking this. Generally speaking, it's just going to make you more consistently tankier, and in some raid fights where you're taking really heavy damage, this is going to be exactly what you need. And since it's 10% reduced damage overall, this is actually useful for magic damage as well, surprisingly. So Demon Spikes obviously only gives you increased armor. Granted, this gives you parry chance as well now, but that's not important. Since it doesn't give you anything against magic damage, you know, it wasn't helping you before, but now with this giving you the 10% DR, this is really value. I really like this. This is one of my favorite talents, I'd say, that affect Demon Spikes, because there is quite a few that affect Demon Spikes, but this is my favorite. Next up, we're going to go into the fire damage increase by 10%. Yep, standard. Most of your damage is fire damage. You're probably looking at about a 7.5% damage increase to maybe an 8% damage increase from taking that. So yeah, just big important one to go for. Next one, we're actually going to take Soul Barrier. So Soul Barrier is a 30-second cooldown, which gives you a pretty decent shield. It consumes all the soul fragments nearby to give you the shield. Now, this to me isn't insane. You know, this isn't. It's been a talent that we've always had, not really often or ever really taken, but it's good because let's say you're about to take a heavy hit from the boss. A very obvious heavy hit that's about to happen from the boss, whether this is a Rygolon Soak, whether this is a Riftmaw from Skolex, whether this is just a tank mechanic in general. Using Soul Barrier means that you can avoid having to use a defensive, which means that if you just do two fractures quickly into a Soul Barrier, which is very quick to do, it's going to give you a big shield that's going to be able to help you survive through these mechanics. And it's it's almost like Celestial Brew for monks, granted quite a bit smaller, but it does mean that, let's say if you don't have Fel Devastation and you don't want to commit a big defensive to a certain hit, you can just use Soul Barrier. Or if you're in a scenario where you're actually just trying to use Fel Devastation and Fiery Brand for as much damage as you possibly can, you can then use the Soul Barrier. Granted, if it's a low damage fight, you just need a little bit of a shield to help you out. All of them are valid options. But I just do think that it's a bit niche, but it's really useful, and it does have like that nice little capability to be really handy. Next up, Revel in Pain. When Fiery Brand expires on your primary target, you get a shield based on the amount of damage that you dealt to the target while Fiery Brand was active. Really useful. Obviously, this is when your DR ends, you then get a shield based on how much damage you dealt to them. And I'll quickly just go over this one, which is going to be Fiery Brand also increases fire damage you deal to the target by 40%. Huge. This is like a 32 to 35% damage increase while Fiery Brand is active, which is absolutely insane, right? You know, you're looking at this huge amount of damage that you're going to be gaining during Fiery Brand, and obviously that's going to help in the Revel of Pain as well. Now, one thing that's worth mentioning, quite often you're not going to be tanking a boss for so long that your Fiery Brand ends up running out while you're still tanking the boss. That is not often going to be the case, mainly because this lasts, 10 seconds, and it's 40% DR, and with other talents later on, we're going to be extending that by about another 5 to 10 seconds. So you're going to find that, you're not going to always have to get that shield. However, for the scenarios where you are tanking the boss for something like 30 seconds, it will be useful, and it will give you a benefit during that time. So there is really good things that are coming from taking taking the Revel in Pain talent, and it also opens up some choice nodes that we're going to want as well. Volatile Flame Blood. Immolation Aura grants Fury every time it deals critical damage, but this cannot occur more than once every second. Now this could pair very well with the Aura of Pain, which increases the critical chance of Immolation Aura by 6%. However, in a single target, it's not really going to proc that much. Even with the extra 6%, it's really not going to proc that much. It's mainly just there so we can go to Dark Glare Boon. It's not all that useful, really. It is nice. It gives you these random little bits of 5 to 10 Fury randomly every, like, let's say 10 seconds. You just get a little bit of Fury, which is good. You know, like I'm not complaining about getting a little bit of Fury every so often. Like, it is what it is, and it only costs 1 point anyway, so that's absolutely fine. This is probably the strongest talent on this tree, I'd like to say, which is Dark Glare Boon. When Fel Devastation finishes fully channeling, it refreshes 20 to 40% of its cooldown and refunds 20 to 40 Fury. Now, whether this is 20 to 40% depending on how long you casted the ability for, or whether that's random, either way, that is still insane. You know, being able to even reduce its cooldown by 20%, which would be the lowest value, is still going to be huge. You know, you're still gaining around 15 seconds less cooldown on Fel Devastation, which is very similar to the talent, or not talent, sorry, the conduit that we have currently that reduces the cooldown of Fel Devastation. However, this has the potential to give you a further cooldown on top of that. You know, 40% will be bringing you to about 35-second cooldown on Fel Devastation, which is nuts. Obviously, the 4-set this patch has really helped. Vengeance Demon Hunter and keeping up a lot more meta uptime and has genuinely made them decent in Ren Plus. Granted, not great in raids, but that's mostly due to the amount of damage that Vengeance Demon Hunters are dealing in single target, but that's a completely separate topic. This is a very good talent. This is still definitely worth taking. I still highly recommend going into this one, and I think almost certainly every build will include this to some extent. Now, we have 2 more points to spend. We're going to go into Agonizing Flames. This is another big reason as to why you want to go into these ones here. Vital. Most builds go Agonizing Flames, which almost every build since it's been out has got Agonizing Flames. Immolation Aura increases your movement speed by 20%. 20% movement speed, pretty nice, pretty decent, pretty good if you need to move about a ton. And duration is increased by 50%. That's the biggie. 50% duration on Immolation Aura is huge, especially with the talents that we're going to be taking, like down here, which is Immolation Aura increases duration of your fiery brand by 0.25 seconds. That's huge. This is like, as it makes it last longer. Very, in general, very pretty important one to take here. Next option we're going to take is Burning Alive. This in single target is useless, really, unless there's ads in the fight, or if there's like multiple bosses or something. But yeah, generally speaking, every 2 seconds fiery brand spreads to one nearby enemy isn't good in single target at all. There's literally nothing, like I said, unless you have some benefit. Otherwise, Charge Flash, obviously 0.5 seconds extra on fiery brand every time an Immolation Aura ticks, which is the reason that you get to around 15 to 20 second fiery brands rather than just 10 second fiery brands, which is really useful because it keeps your DR up for longer and also your fire damage increase up for longer, which is going to be a huge benefit. Then the last choice down here is Firebrand has a 15-second reduced cooldown, which is down from 1 minute, so it's a 45-second recharge, and you have 2 charges rather than just 1. Really useful. It means you start off the fight with an extra fiery brand, meaning that you can use a fiery brand on pull, even if you're not tanking the boss, just so you get lost with loads of extra fire damage. Now that's useful. That is honestly very useful. And the reduced cooldown is also incredibly nice. This, I'm pretty sure, is here to compensate for the lack of legendary that we're going to have that would have usually reduced the cooldown of Fiery Brand. And the additional charge is nice as well, so I'm really glad that this is a talent that we're getting. Next choice is Fel Devastation, damage increased by 40%, since we're getting it loads more from Dark Glare Boon. Really useful, really useful. 40% increased Fel Dev damage, which is obviously fire damage, and since it's fire damage, we're then going to get more benefit from the Fiery Demise. Yeah, generally speaking, this is looking good, and this is what I'm really excited for. Feed the Demon. Consuming a Soul Fragment reduces the cooldown of Demon Spikes by 0.5 seconds. Very good one. Again, you know, you consume, you know, you do 2 fractures into the Soul Barrier, or even just 2 fractures into 2 Soul Cleaves, and you consume all 4 of those. you're going to be getting 2 seconds off Demon Spikes recharge, which is really good. Each fracture that you do is giving you a second, really, off Demon Spikes. Super nice. And that on top of the, what's it called? The other options that are giving you more soul fragments as well. Overall, Feed the Demon's nice. It's going to be more uptime on your defensiveness from Demon Spikes, which means obviously more of this DR from Calcified Spikes and more parry chance. Nice one. Now we have 3 points left. I feel like it's pretty obvious what we're going to be going into here. Soul Carver, this is pure single target. This is carve into the soul of your target, dealing 150% attack power plus 150% attack power fire damage, which is basically 300% attack power fire damage. And a dot over 3 seconds, which then gives you some soul fragments, and gives you 1 soul fragment every second for the next 3 seconds. So overall gives you 5 soul fragments, which is really, really, really nice. But the damage is the main part. We're basically looking at 400% attack damage total, which is almost the damage of the initial hit from the hunt, which is massive. And it quite literally is more damage than Elysian Decree. So that's a lot of damage. And it's fire damage. Once again, fire damage meaning that it is increased by 40% while you have Fiery Demise. You're healing for 5% of that. You're also getting the fire damage increased by 10%. So you're actually looking at about 50% more damage than what this is saying. So it's 400% to plus 50% if you've got Fiery Brand active. So you're looking at 600% attack damage, which basically almost is a hunt. It's almost an entire hunt. This thing on a 1 minute cooldown, obviously, which is a lower cooldown than the hunt, and it's giving you some soul fragments. This is really useful, really, really nice. Overall, very good in single target, useless in AoE really, but like very, very good in single target. Last Resort, obviously it's the always taken talent for the entirety of Vengeance Demon's existence. Very insane. Fatal damage brings you back to life and in meta for the full duration of meta, which is about 17 seconds-ish, give or take. A few seconds, I'm not exactly sure, I don't remember that well, but insane, really good. We're always taking this. I use it personally as a defensive, you know, when I'm sitting there, I'm like, I know I'm going to die at this point in the fight, and I don't have defensives. Instead of asking for an external, I'll just use Last Resort as the defensive. Because it's huge. It's basically, you survive fatal damage, which is insane, first of all. And it's any fatal damage, by the way. This isn't like, oh, you know, you survive up to 100% of your maximum HP. You always survive. So you can take let's say if there's a soak, you can solo that soak by just using Last Resort. Like, that's why it's so good, really. It's like, it's any amount of damage, and it puts you in meta for 17 seconds. So you then come back to life with, like, above half HP, and you're unkillable. Like, it's insane. It's so good, and that's why it's 100% worth taking. And then last choice is between Follow the Flame and Elysian Decree. So Follow the Flame is your damaging abilities have a chance to cool down a condemned demon for 25 seconds, throwing a glaive does lethal damage to the guy who explodes on death, dealing 200% attack power to all nearby enemies, healing you for 25% of your health, and the explosion deals reduced damage. Yeah, about past 5 targets. That versus Elysian Decree, which is basically the same thing realistically, I'm not going to lie, but this one doesn't heal you, but instead deals more damage, and obviously activates only after a couple seconds, but you know, you have to throw the glaive at the demon otherwise. However, one is Follow the Flame, which is 1.58 procs per minute, versus Elysian Decree, which is a 1 minute cooldown. Now, 1.58 procs per minute is like for 200% damage, let's say, versus 350% at a 1 minute cooldown. The 350%, you know, is 75% more damage. Granted, it's happening 50% less of the time ish on average. That's very, very rough maths. Overall, Elysian Decree is going to give you more single target damage, and it's going to give you some lesser soul fragments. It's going to give you 3 lesser soul fragments total, meaning that you're going to get some benefit from Feed the Demon. Granted, that isn't the most, and you control where it is. Generally speaking, I'm pretty certain Elysian Decree is going to be best, unless there's some changes to Follow the Flame, which they wouldn't make it so the demon's actually worth taking. So if that happens, then I guess it could be Follow the Flame, but for now, I'm going to put Elysian Decree, and that's going to close out our single target build here. Now, I spoke about a lot during this build. I spoke about a lot, especially to do the magic damage side of things, but I think the overall question that lets to stand is, will this be good? Is Vengeance Demon Hunter going to be worth taking into raids with these abilities? My answer is yes, but on a niche capabilities. I do not think they'll be taken into fights randomly. I don't think you're just going to take this into prog. I don't think it's going to be your starting tanks. I think it's very much going to be a tank that you take for very niche circumstances. For instance, here we can see how well they deal with magic damage in their kit. If you need a heavy magic damage tank, and blood DKs just aren't good, which I think they probably will be, but you know, you need a Vengeance Demon Hunter for that reason. Yeah, you can see that. If you need an incredibly high mobility tank, yes, I can see Vengeance Demon Hunter being taken. Scenarios similar to Painsmith, I can see Vengeance Demon Hunter being taken all the time. However, if it's a very just standard fight where you're just slapping a boss and there isn't really much to do, good examples of this is Prototype Pantheon, Lahuvim, Guardian of the first one, loads of them. Most bosses, you won't take Vengeance Demon Hunter. There's nothing that's too special about it. The defensive capabilities are looking really strong. These little burst windows with Fiery Brand, plus, you know, Elysian Decree, the Hunt, Soul Carver. You know, you can get these really big burst windows, but it's just not 100% worth taking. Darkness is a huge reason as to why you want to take them. However, you're not going to take a Vengeance Demon Hunter specifically just to do Darkness, when you could just change one of your melee DPS to a Havoc Demon Hunter at the end of the day. I would say Vengeance Demon Hunter 100% will always be taken if Havoc is completely in the mud. If Havoc is like a bottom 2 or bottom 3 spec, completely useless, does 0 damage in comparison to some of the other classes, yes, I reckon you will take a Vengeance Demon Hunter just for the buffs, for the 5% magic and also the darkness. But if Vengeance Demon, so if Havoc is even just below average, you know, this isn't bad, but it's just below average, you'll probably not take Vengeance Demon Hunter. I think it looks good, you know, it definitely looks a lot better than Vengeance Demon Hunter does right now, you know, like, but that's the thing, all the tanks are looking really good right now. All the tanks are in a spot where you're thinking, I want that in my raid because of this, I want that in my raid because of this, and Vengeance doesn't have something that I'm really looking at it and being like, I want that in my raid because of this, because I don't even necessarily know if I want it in my raid, you know? So it's okay, don't get me wrong, it's going to be an absolutely fine tank. Don't think it'll be taken in single target fights, might be taken in some niche fights, but that's about it, or under some niche circumstances. But anyway, that's that. Now let's jump into the Mythic Plus talents. And we're back! God, took me a second to return back to doing this, but we're here. You know, it was like a second for you guys, but that was more like an hour for me. But we're back. We're back here. We're going to talk about now the M Plus talents. Yeah, the M Plus talents. So the primary tree, the standard tree, isn't really going to change that much for M Plus. There's going to be a few key changes, but there's not. It's generally going to follow a very similar vibe, going for a lot of the same stuff that we want to. Similar to the other one, especially in this middle area. However, the Vengeance tree, now that's where we're going to see the biggest amount of changes, but let's not waste any more time, let's go back into it. So, obviously Hot Feet, getting an extra charge, really useful in M+, kiting more, pulling packs quicker, so you don't have some random DPS player who's, you know, zerging out and just trying to pull as much as they can as quickly as they can because they're impatient. Standard. Imprison this time. Obviously, we skipped Imprison last time. However, this is obviously a lot better of a choice than M+. Imprison is really useful, yeah. Imprison is something that you want to take. It allows you to CC things and skip past things. Good. That's also humanoids and beasts, which is the most common things, really, over anything else. Shattered Souls healing, same as before, just a nice buff. Consume magic. This is really useful in M+. Obviously because, you know, consuming the magic defect is just, oh, it's so good. Granted, you're also a demon hunter, so you also have your mass purge as well. So this basically makes you an absolute purge maniac, making it really, really decent to take. And in almost every single dungeon has some sort of use. And in some dungeons has such a massive and important use that it's really, really valuable to take. Increasing the range on your disrupt is also incredibly strong. The reason being for this is because it means that you don't have to do any sort of weird shenanigans with how you pull certain packs. What I mean by that is, you know, if you're kiting, you don't have to worry about running into the pack to then interrupt something if you're the only interrupt for your team, which makes it incredibly useful. And going the extra fury on a successful interrupt is also incredibly good because This basically means you're going to be getting this random bits of 30 Fury quite often. In dungeons, you're almost interrupting on cooldown half the time during packs. So getting 30 Fury on every interrupt is incredibly good. Obviously in Raid, this isn't good because you're not really going to be getting many interrupts, if any. But N+, it's a really good one to take. We're also then going to take for our last point up here is the 5% healing for all damage, fire damage you deal. Again, you deal so much fire damage, it's just so valuable to take. Now, a few people that I've seen have taken some options here, which I haven't, and I'll go over why I haven't chosen them. So a big one is Flames of Thunder. Sigil Flame grants an additional 2 Fury per target hit. That's good. That's really good. You know, if you're in a pack of like 5 enemies, you're getting 10 Fury extra on top of just like the base Fury that it would have given you, which was 30 just from using Sigil Flame, which is good. It's good, you know, it means you get an extra Soul Cleave. Not good enough in my opinion, unless you're doing like some serious mass AoE. I'd say if you're only really almost filling up your bar is when it's really useful, but even then, you're not generating souls from your Sigil Flame, so there's no real benefit to using it. It's whatever. Overall, it just isn't really worth taking. And also the what's it called? Sorry, the Consume Magic granting additional Fury. It's just not that good. It's really just like, it's whatever. You don't use it enough to warrant giving 20 Fury, unlike getting 30 Fury from interrupts, which you'll use about 500 times more. Then we're also going to go Aura of Pain, because the crit chance now for Immolation Aura is going to be a lot better, because in AoE, Immolation Aura is going to be doing much more regular damage, so 6% crit on that is going to be super nice. Now, Rush of Chaos being an obvious choice to make here, 60 seconds reduced cooldown, and 2 shots of Infernal Armor, 2 shots of Soul Rending as well. Infernal Armor being incredibly high value in AoE because you're going to be getting a lot more damage to it, because you're getting a lot more hits. And obviously Soul Rending giving you a good amount of leech, which is going to be really useful for M+, especially because of how much damage you're going to be taking and how much damage you're going to be dishing out with all your abilities. Chaos Nova. Yeah, AoE stun. What more could you want? This is something that was obviously only a thing for Havoc Demon Hunters. When we're seeing a lot of this, only things for Havoc Demon Hunters now becoming a thing for Vengeance as well. Really good, and honestly, with a lot of the stuff that Vengeance is getting, is making it look like an M+. It actually could be a bit of a powerhouse, but we'll look at some more stuff, and obviously we'll have to see what the tier sets are like when they come out. Demonic, I've talked about this before, incredibly important, 100% worth taking. Sigil of Silence being unbelievable in M+. Sigil of Silence is truly one of the hands-down best M+ abilities in the game. AoE, interrupt first of all, and silence. You know, we have some interrupts from, for instance, Shadow Priest has an interrupt that silences for 3 seconds, which is already seen as like, oh, that silence is really good. Imagine that, but AoE, and it lasts for longer with some of the later ones that you take, you know, all of the other talents that you take, so incredibly useful, super must have. 3 more points to be able to get to the last area. Now, this is where I'm going to talk about one part of the tree which needs to be changed. Hands down, needs to be changed. There is no other way about it. And that is this choice node versus Lost in Darkness. Now, this choice node is the worst choice node I've ever seen. Both options are so bad that they're not worth taking. So to quickly talk about it, you either get all sigils are now placed at your location and the duration of their effects is increased by 2 seconds. Nice, I guess it's niche. However, you want to be able to aim your sigils at certain areas to hit enemies from far away. For instance, you want to be able to sigil a flame something before you go into the pack, rather than just as you get in there. Or sometimes you want to use your, you know, Sigil of Misery to be able to CC something that's running away before it pulls another patrol or something like that. Or maybe even a patrol that's going to walk into you guys that you're going to take anyway. You want to Sigil of Misery it. You know, like, it's just not good. And then the other one is Precise Sigils, which is all sigils now placed at your target location. But there's no other benefit than that. I can do that myself. I don't need to have an auto aim, you know. And then at the same time, there's often places where I want to place my sigil so it hits all the enemies. But if all the enemies aren't in a position where the one that I'm targeting is good, then that's not great either. And also, at the same time, if you're attacking something and you want to place a sigil at another enemy, you'd have to swap targets to that to place it. Useless. So because both of these choices are completely worthless, we'll actually degrade your gameplay if you take those. Like, you will get worse if you take them than if you didn't take them. We're going to take Lost in Darkness, which is also useless almost. Spectral Sight lasts an additional 6 seconds if disrupted by attacking or taking damage. Spectral Sight has no usage inside combat. Like, there isn't any. This is worthless. You're never going to ever get value from this ever. But the reason we're taking this is so we can go 4% maximum health, which might seem like a lot, 3 points just to get 4% maximum health. But it's worth taking, honestly. I feel like the 4% maximum health is good. The other choices that you could have had is, a little bit of magic damage reduction here, or, a bit of extra fury, or some extra movement speed as well. But there just isn't enough value, I think, in the other options to really take them, and therefore I think the 4% maximum health is just kind of the better option, especially for M+, especially because magic damage in M+, by the way, is a lot less, what's the word, common. Not very common seeing magic damage, and if you do, it's usually not as often or in short amounts, so it's not as important to go magic damage like it would be in a raid environment where one boss might just have a lot of it. You might have individual packs that do a lot of magic damage, but the whole dungeon as a whole won't do loads and loads of magic damage, unless it's a bit of a weird dungeon. So magic damage isn't as valuable. Now, next up, we're going to go to this choice node this time, actually. Now, we didn't go over this choice node before because it's both Chaos Nova choices, which isn't really good for single target or prog environments. And instead of going, so the choices are actually, each enemy stunned by Chaos Nova has a 30% chance to generate a lesser soul fragment. 30% might sound like a bit, but honestly, you'll find that that's not going to give you many. In a 5-target environment, that's about a 15% chance of not getting any, like 0, which is quite a lot, Like, if you think about that, 15% chance of getting 0 in 5 targets. That's quite often. That's worryingly often. You're not going to get many of this. In 5 targets, you'll get 1 or 2 on average. Not worth taking. And instead go for the reduced cost, plus the cooldown is reduced. Reduced cost means that you can use more soul cleaves, so you're going to get more healing anyway, so you wouldn't need the lesser souls. And then obviously, the reduced cooldown is incredibly useful just in general, so I'd highly suggest going that. Then we're going to go down both the Infernal Strike charges, which isn't going to be as important in M+, but it's still going to be really good, as I mentioned before, and Collective Anguish, which is also going to be really nice, because this is just more AoE damage for the more of the Fel Devastations that you're going to do. Next up, we're going to go into Darkness. However, we're not going to go into Pitch Black. Now, the reason we're not going in with the reduced cooldown for Darkness is because, or just even either of these, to be honest, is because A, you want the hunt, and B, and a really important B, is it's not that important. There isn't often times where you get big bits of damage that are between 3 to 5 minutes, like in between. So what I mean by that is, let's say you've got a boss with a soak ability that does a lot of damage to people inside the soak, such as the Mailroom Mayhem boss, and you want to use Darkness for that to see if you can keep some people alive. Yeah, it's a decent usage. Darkness isn't good for big hits because, it's a 20% chance of avoiding all damage. So if you don't avoid all damage, you take all the damage anyway, so it's not consistent. It's much better against loads of ticks of small damage. If something did 10 applications of 10k damage, this is going to block on average 20k damage. However, if it's one application of 100, it's got a 20% chance of blocking all of it, or none of, or 80% chance of blocking none of it. So it's not as good for soaks like that. But let's say you end up having a soak where it is useful for during a boss fight. Most of the time, you're not going to be able to get multiple usages of it during that specific dungeon boss fight by taking the extra talent. So but then even then, on top of that, there's not many packs where you need to use Darkness in very quick succession. What I mean by this, basically, overall TLDR, you're not going to have many opportunities where you're going to be using Darkness between 3 and 5 minutes between each usage. most of the time you're going to have quite a lot of time between each darkness, and therefore you don't need to take it really. However, it is obviously still a really important one to take, because it is also going to help you when you're getting hit by shit. This is a defensive for you as well. It's not just a group-wide defensive. Granted, that is what it's mostly used for, so it is still worth taking 100%. Sigil of Misery. Now, this is one that's really good. Obviously, Sigil of Misery is really good for CCing things, and also in mass interrupt. You know, if everything starts interrupting at once and you pop a Sigil of Misery down, you delay it by a little bit longer, so maybe someone else gets their cooldown back, or the enemies die before they're able to get the casts off. But what's really good for is like fleeing mobs, or just in general, if you need to CC them quickly while you run away, it's also good for that. You know, there's quite a lot of good usages for Sigil of Misery, and it's 100% worth taking. There is a choice node underneath, which reduces the cooldown by the 30 seconds, which is not worth taking. Or the other one is you deal 20% increased damage to enemies for 5 seconds after Sigil of Misery's effect ends on them. Now, looks good on paper. You might think, oh, 20% more damage for 5 seconds after Sigil Misery. That's pretty good. I'm not sure if that's after the 20 seconds of Sigil Misery ends, or if you can cancel it early. I'm not sure. I think it would work if you cancel it early. However, 20% extra damage for 5 seconds isn't that good, because bear in mind it will only work on packs or enemies that are able to get affected by it. This will not work on bosses or anything, so could be worth taking, maybe, but also at the same time, your burst isn't super insane. Like, your burst is good, don't get me wrong, your burst is very good. You'll be able to get a lot of value out of it, but it's not so good that it would super require taking it. And again, I'm not even sure if it would work necessarily. And there's other things that we want to put points into, really. 3% parry chance over the magic damage. Like I said before, magic damage isn't as prevalent, but parry is always prevalent. You're always getting meleeed. Most of the damage in N+ is going to come from melee attacks, so it's really important to have that 3% parry, because it's going to be happening a lot more often, obviously with a lot more attacks coming through, so that's really good. Increasing the duration of your Sigil effects by 2 seconds, really good, especially for Sigil of Silence, which is now going to go to 4 seconds. 4 seconds Sigil of Silence? That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I'll take that, you know. And then quickened sigils, which is all sigils activate 1 second faster, which is really useful. It means that you only have 1 second for them to go off rather than having to wait a couple seconds. But then the most important part is reducing their cooldowns by 20%, meaning that Sigil of Silence will then go down to almost a 1 minute cooldown. You know, Elysian Decree is going to go on like a lower cooldown. All these different things, and we've seen quickened sigils being taken in the majority of the Shadowlands, especially with Elysian Decree becoming a thing. However, now we can take Sigil of Chains alongside it. So there's a lot of benefits. Generally speaking, you've seen this is a lot more based around your sigils, because your sigils are going to be much more powerful, because you're able to take a lot more of these different choices. So like I said, the core of it, you know, like when you look at these middle options here, these are very much the same. You're still taking a lot of these core options. Granted, there is a few different changes, such as taking quickened sigils instead of the extra, like a lot of the extra stuff, and not going around and lift this left-hand part of the tree. But generally speaking, it is very similar. A lot more utility-based. With the sigils, with Chaos Nova, with Darkness, Imprison, Consume Magic. You're going to see Vengeance Demon Hunter in N+ being a lot more utility-based, which is going to be super nice. The same with Paladin. Paladin in N+ is also going to be incredibly utility-based. So I do like that this role that they're giving tanks now, by giving them a lot more of the utility that their other DPS specs might have had beforehand. Because basically this is just going to allow tanks now to have more control over these dungeons, which granted tanks already did have most of the control, which some people had a problem with at some point. You know, some people have said, I don't like pug tanks because if they're bad, it causes the entire key to go wrong, and that's true to an extent. However, it is also really nice as a tank player to be able to have more control over these dungeons, because at the end of the day, if you're a good tank, you can solo most of these dungeons. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I've done weeklies on one character with 4 of my other characters in there. Like, it works. It's really good. But either way, let's jump now into the M+ side of things. Fel Devastation, obviously Frailty, Fiery Brand. This is where we're gonna start seeing changes. First time, we were on the complete right-hand side of the tree, or for you guys, here we go, right-hand side of the tree, and we were all over this part, and we were going down all the Firebrand builds, but now we're going to shift everything over to the left-hand side of the tree, and we're going to go down purely for Frailty. And let me explain why. Frailty, with all the different buffs and all the different things you can get down here, is looking unbelievable. Like, Frailty is looking insane. All these AoE debuffs that you can put on things, and these constant benefits that you can get from having Frailty on stuff is going to look incredible. So, but, So it's going to definitely be worth taking, but let's jump into it. So obviously we have to go down Throw to be able to go down the left. Going down Fracture. We're not actually going to be going down Calcified Spikes yet, or just in general, because you don't have enough points to do what you want to do. A big issue with this part of the build is, even though this is looking like the best M+ build, at least in my opinion, Sigil of Chains is still on the right-hand side of this build. I'm going to these other ones are as well, but this isn't too important. Sigil of Chains is a must-have. It's an absolute must-have in dungeons, which sucks, but oh well. We're going to go down that side of Sigil of Chains. But like, here's the thing with the spikes, and this is worth mentioning. You have 3 choices of the spikes to go into. You can choose any of these 3, whichever feel good for you. You can go for the extra damage, which gives you more threat, which could be really good if tanks have any threat troubles, because these are actually, this specifically mentions that it generates high threat when you have melee attacks against you during demon spikes, which is going to be good, especially if we have sort of threat troubles. Granted, if things are already attacking you, you probably won't lose threat anyway, but either way, worth taking if there's threat problems or if you just want more damage. Calcified Spikes, which is going to give you nice DR after Demon Spikes ends, which is going to be good for M+, because M+ are taking constant, consistent damage, versus, and also the parry chance. Also really good. Demon Spikes giving you parry chance. You know, that's going to be really useful as well, especially during M+, when you have loads of things swinging at you. This is going to be really high value. So you can go down any of these. Personally, I'm going to go down Deflecting Spikes. I think Deflecting Spikes, in my opinion, is just going to be the most value in the majority of M+ runs, and it's also good during some of the boss fights, unlike Retaliation would be. I'm going to go down a Sigil of Chains and Burning Blood. Sigil of Chains obviously dragging everything together and slowing them, which is unbelievable for M+. This is like a Gorfian's Graphs. It's going to bring everything together, so stuff like Demo Locks might have an easier time. And just generally speaking, everything's going to be stacked up, more damage for your team, and it slows them. Really good for kiting, incredibly strong ability. We're not going to be going down any of things from this choice node. This is basically as far right as the furthest right we'll ever go at any point. We're going to start going down the left now. Volatile Flame Blood. Whenever Immolation or a crits, it gives you 5 to 10 Fury, which is obviously going to be increased by this. Now you're in AoE, this has a lot more value in AoE, because since you're hitting so many more things, you have so many more chances of getting these crits, which means that even though it says, oh, this will only happen once every second, you will basically be getting this once every at least 1.5 to 2 seconds in like 5 to 6 targets, because it's just going to be constantly ticking. So this 5 to 10 Fury, basically every, let's say you get 7 Fury every 2 seconds, which is kind of an average to maybe lower case scenario. That's still really good. Like, that's still really nice, because after what, 5 seconds ish, 4 to 5 seconds, you get a free Soul Cleave or a free Spirit Bomb. Which is going to be so nice, so nice, and I'm really excited to actually use this talent. This talent looks like it's going to be fun with passive Fury regeneration during AoE. Now, obviously, Dark Glare Boon, like I mentioned earlier, this is probably used in every build. This looks incredibly overpowered right now, being potentially up to 40% of its cooldown, potentially reduced. Unbelievable. Seriously good. Then we go back to the left, Agonizing Flames, as mentioned earlier, just a really important one to get, especially because the movement speed is also really nice, and then plus the consistent just walking speed is going to be good as well for kiting. But the damage is the most important part, really, at the end of the day. Fallout, this is so good in AoE. It basically means that I would say in about 7 targets plus, you're almost guaranteed to get full charges of what's it called? Soul Fragments. Now, in 5 targets, you're probably going to be getting 3 in most scenarios, sometimes even 4 and stuff like that, so it's really good to just give you a shit ton of souls, which you can then bring into a Spirit Bomb, which is also going to be going into. I really like how Spirit Bomb's on this side. It's really cool, but the most important part of Spirit Bomb, and the reason why you're taking Spirit Bomb in AoE, is because it applies Frailty on every single hit, which means that you're constantly getting Frailty. It's obviously 5 seconds of Frailty, so you're going to be having to use it relatively constant a lot of the time to keep up the Frailty. Really good, consistent way of keeping Frailty up, which is obviously healing you right now for 80% of the damage that you deal. But now, the further that we're going to go down this tree, the more Frailty is going to get buffed. So now the next one we're going to go into is targets affected by Frailty also deal 4% reduced damage to you. That's huge. That is... Oh, and it's also applied by Soul Cleave now as well, but this is still humongous. 4% reduced damage by anything. like 4% DR permanently and while also doing healing for 8% of the damage you deal to them, plus all your other stuff. This is really good. I'm like, we're only just getting into this sort of frailty part, but we'll keep going down. We're going to go 2 points into Painbringer now. Painbringer is looking like one of my favorite talents from this tree. Consuming Soul Fragment reduces all damage you take by 2% for 4 seconds, meaning, if you use something like Fallout and you get maximum stacks and then put a Spirit Bomb, you take 10% DR for 4 seconds. That's really good. Like, it's just basically a constant, I would say, minimum 4% DR constantly, which is really, again, good. It's similar to the Void Reaver. So you're taking this, again, constant passive DR, which we're seeing across a lot of tanks. A lot of tanks are getting a lot of talents, which are giving them passive DR here, passive DR there, passive DR here, passive DR there, which is really good because it's like, tanks are going to be a lot easier to play. However, I think min-maxing them is going to be a lot more. I think what's brilliant about this, and a lot of these things, since a lot of these are passive, a lot of these are like, just as you're playing, stuff happens. You don't need to think about it. Thinking about it will improve your gameplay, but you don't need to think about what you're doing, really, to be able to be tanky. I think one of the biggest problems right now with tanks is in especially the sort of higher keys. If you're not playing something like a Blood DK, it's so hard to stay alive in like this sort of like 20, I'm just talking like 24s, 25s, not necessarily too high, but like you can find it a struggle to stay alive. You have to focus on what you're doing to stay alive. So this is definitely going to lower the bar for entry in terms of tanking, which is going to be super nice. I'm just really excited to see what they do with it. I'm really excited to see how tanky tanks feel as well with the rest of this stuff. But anyway, let's continue. We're going to go now into Stoke the Flames. Fel Devastation damage is increased by 40%. Again, really good, especially with Dark Glare Boon. And I don't think it will affect the Eye Beam, but either way, still really good damage. Really, really happy with that. Still, 2 points into Feed the Demon. Again, this is actually a lot better because now with stuff like Fallout and, running Spirit Bomb to consume things really quickly, generally speaking, your soul fragments that you're going to be getting are a little bit more prevalent. You're going to be getting a little bit more soul fragments than you would have normally, so you're going to be getting more battle value out of Feed the Demon, so you're going to have a lot more uptime on those demon spikes, which is going to be really good for obviously increasing the parry, so there's a lot of good reasons to do that. And then we're going to go down into Last Resort and Elysian Decree once again. Elysian Decree obviously being super good, but obviously generating those Lesser Soul Shards as well is super nice. Last Resort, just being Last Resort, always want to take it. Super, super, super good. And we're not actually going to go into Soul Carver. Soul Carver is really bad in AoE. Like, it generates some soul fragments, which is really nice, but other than that, it's just single target damage. It's just not great. Not benefiting you too much in M+. We're going to go down Soulmonger, which is consuming a soul fragment that would heal you above full health. So basically, overhealing soul fragments will then give you a shield instead up to a certain amount of health. This is a huge talent to take. There is so many times where I overheal soul fragments. If you look at a demon hunter, then most of the time, like 50% overheal on their soul fragments. So this is going to be super good to turn that into a shield to keep you alive for longer. I think this is probably one of the most important talents to take, especially if you're going for something like a Spirit Bomb build, where you want to be using Spirit Bomb even if you might have full HP. So you're going to be consuming a lot of your souls while at max health regardless. Really important one to take, really good. I think it's going to definitely increase the effectiveness of self-survivability on Demon Hunter, and it's also going to, again, lower this bar for entry to tanking, because it means that you have to worry about overhealing too much because you've got this shield. Next one is Frailty. It now increases all damage you deal to targets by 8%. Huge! Again, permanent 8% damage buff. Like, this is insane. So now we're healing for 8% of the damage we deal, dealing 8% more damage, they're dealing 4% less damage to you, and that's permanent. And that's not even including the rest of the talents. That's just 3 talents. So that's a massive one. And then last of all is multiple applications of Frailty may overlap. Oh my god. That talent is going to be insane. If you do one of the double shots, which I personally did a lot of, I don't necessarily know the technical term for them. I call them double shots because I think it was a fun name, which is when you double fracture into, or not even double fracture, you can like fall out into getting 4 soul shards in AoE, then start cranking up an Elysian Decree, and before it goes off, you use the Spirit Bomb, Elysian Decree then blows up, and you instantly Spirit Bomb again right after, and you get this big burst of damage, big burst of healing. It was especially good with the Kyrian Lego because it was first fall that you would inhale, I guess you can say, or absorb really, would also give you the stacks of your versatility, but now that's going to give you double Frailty stacks, which is huge, you know, especially because you have Frailty stacks to the first Elysian Decree go off. Generally speaking, this is looking really good. This build in AoE is looking like an absolute powerhouse. You're looking really self-sustainable. You're looking like you're taking very little damage. You've got incredible amounts of utility with Sigil of Silence, Misery, Darkness, AoE, Stun, Sigil of Chains. So you got like, so in terms of AoE interrupts that you have Sigil of Silence, Sigil of Misery, you have Sigil of Chains which can AoE interrupt, you have Chaos Nova that can AoE interrupt. You have so many options. You know, it's looking really good. It's looking really, really good. So in AoE, I think in M+, we're definitely going to see Vengeance Demon Hunter doing a lot better. I think we're just going to have to see how it ends up panning out, because at the end of the day, no one knows for sure. No one knows what the tier sets are going to be. But I personally think, as it stands, Vengeance Demon Hunter in AoE could end up being a lot more of a powerhouse than we're seeing from something like a Paladin or something like a Monk or anything like that. Worth mentioning though, a lot of people might look at this Frailty build and, you know, I'm raving about it right now. I'm talking about it like, oh my god, this is the most amazing thing ever. Why don't I just use this in raid single target if, you know, if it's so good? The big reason as to why this isn't good in raid single target is because Fiery Brand gives you a lot more single target survivability, and the other choices are giving you a lot more single target damage. These are all AoE. Everything here is AoE. Everything here is hitting multiple targets. Spirit Bomb hitting multiple targets. Because Spirit Bomb's hitting multiple targets, this is, like all these are giving you AoE benefits really. There's not much single target benefit from Frailty, especially because, oh shit, Frailty overlapping in single target is, I guess, okay, because you're going to be having it go off your Soul Cleave, applies Frailty to your primary target. That's good, but it's just not good enough. You're not getting enough of a benefit out of it. And you're also not able to take some of the other choices that you would have preferred to have taken as well. So, overall, Mythic Posto. Oh, chef's kiss. Looking really good. I'm actually really excited to play this build. I've really enjoyed the Spirit Bomb build. I think it's my favorite build in general, to the point where I still play it in raids, even though it's not as good, just because I prefer doing it. It's just more enjoyable for me. And with this Frailty, it's looking like it could be really exciting to play. Like, really exciting to play. So I do really appreciate what they've done here. I'm excited to play this build. The only change I'd like them to make is making Sigil of Chains perhaps not all the way over here. Like, I mean, it's kind of no problem, because you can kind of go over here and you want to get this one anyway. But if I didn't have to go all the way on this right hand side, I would have been able to go down the middle and get some of the better options that I would have preferred to have taken. Sigil of Chains does just feel a bit out of the way. Maybe they could have put this on the main tree, or, you know, putting it further on the left somewhere, Feast of Souls or something like that. Because, you know, if you're going down the Spirit Bomb side of things, you don't really want Feast of Souls with Soul Cleave next to Spirit Bomb. If you're going Spirit Bomb, you generally want to use Spirit Bomb. You don't want to use Soul Cleave. Like, what? Such a weird option to have there. So that'd have been a really nice change. Really nice change. I actually think that'd be a perfect change, but oh well, it's fine. I still really like the tree. I'm still really excited to play it. But that is it. That's the end of the video. This is the last one that I'll be making by myself. Like I mentioned before at the start of this video, I will no longer be making any more talent speculations because I don't feel qualified. I will if they severely change the talents, or, you know, maybe on release I'll talk about the talents. And once the tier lists are released, I will make a full tier list on the tanks, in my opinion, and through some of the opinions of the other tanks that I know in the community. But anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. If you have any questions, please go check out my streams, both on YouTube and twitch.tv. As well as that, you can find me on Twitter at Meewah_LOL. Obviously, Twitch is Meewah_. All links will be in the description. If you guys are interested in looking at these talents a bit more in detail, I'll provide a link to these talent trees also in the description below, so you guys can check them out at your own discretion. But that's it from me. Gonna continue these daily uploads, and I'll see you guys again tomorrow.